to Teaching Artistry with Courtney J. Boddie. That's me. This is a podcast that celebrates artists and advocates for community engagement. And this is We Can't Go Back, a video series in partnership with Creative Generation meant to examine, interrogate, and confront racist policies and systems in the arts. This series amplifies leaders in arts and culture who drive radical change in communities through anti-racist and liberatory practices. Subscribe to the Teaching Artistry with Courtney J. Boddie YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. I identify as a cisgender woman. My pronouns are she, her, and I am always uplifting and paying respect to my ancestors across the African diaspora who have been stolen from their native lands, their homelands, and within the US. I live in Brooklyn. That is on the stolen lands of Munsee Lenape and the Canarsie Nations. And I also pay respect and uplift the indigenous diaspora woven into my history and DNA through a network of solidarity and love. Let's welcome our guest, Ashley Herring. Hi, Ashley.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you. I just can't. Let's get into it. Let's get right into it. Okay, so tell me, what is your role in arts and arts education? And what are some ways that you embed anti-racism practices into your work?
All right, this is Ashley. Hey, she, her, hers. I'm a Black queer woman. I have locks, and right now I have on red and black glasses. I'm very light-skinned, which has given me a lot of privileges along the way, and I acknowledge. I too always am honoring my ancestors and like to say I'm doing ancestral work, and that I am doing nothing new, and that this has all been done before, and I feel like it's all been laid out for me to kind of like answer the call as an arts educator, and organizer. And am on Massachusetts and Mashpee Wampanoag land, and do a lot of work to support those tribes as much as possible in the work that I do and center and lift them up. How do I incorporate anti-racism, anti-Blackness, dismantling white supremacy? I feel like a radical Black superhero doing all this stuff.
Because you are.
I would say it starts with myself in that I am trying to not be better than anyone else. I try to do a lot of reading. I check my language. I check the way I move. I check the way I'm moving with young people. So it starts within. I would say that is a big continuation. It's always ongoing. Never perfect, never all right, often wrong. So that self-work is huge. And then I would say, within the work, I am co-running a Black homeschool collective, a Black liberation space, very radical. In our learning community, our Black liberation homeschool space, we center Black trans women. We center Black people who are neurodivergent, Black people who are disabled, Black people who are poor. And so we name those things out loud. We don't pretend to move around those things. I also understand that people call themselves different things. And so like I see, I'm a Black queer woman who's in a what appears to be a cis hetero relationship. So I hope that the terms I'm using are also correct. This is something I'm constantly working on, is like language. Like, am I using language that is honoring people for where they are? So that is something that we do a lot. How are we speaking around each other? Is something that's huge. It's like those everyday actions that we center a lot, and just like calling things out. Like my 5.5-year-old, we talk about patriarchy and misogyny all the time. We talk about that in our homeschool collective. It happens to be 6 kids who are he, him, in our Black Liberation Homeschool Co-op. And we understand that that's what they say that's who they are now. And we realize that that could change.
Mm-hmm.
And we also need them to understand that, like, you know, there are people who are he, him who are pregnant. And there are people who are he, him that wear dresses. And there are people, you know, like, and that is something that we center and talk about on a regular basis by this, that stuff that comes out by like, oh, boys do this and girls do that. And, you know, every time we start our morning circle, everybody has to say their name and pronouns. You know, it's just like, it's the everyday things. And then on top of that, it's like, what books do we have in our space?
Mm-hmm.
What are we, when we're listening to music, how do we name stuff that we hear that's violent against particularly Black women, like, right, misogynoir kind of like stuff, quoting Mara Healy, I think that's her name, Moria, who misogynoir about like Black women in music. But like, I would say that like language is huge, naming things is huge, being intentional about what we're learning and how we're moving together through the day, being steeped in values, talking about white supremacy culture and things that are internalized. And then I always just bring it back to myself again. What am I in practice of? How am I showing up? What am I modeling? What am I continuing to like perpetuate through my language or my actions? Am I being ageist with young folks, right? It's like the work is continuous.
It's I mean,
There's a lot there.
Continuous, but it also sounds exponential. In our society, we're so used to being like, oh, and I did it, yay, and I got a medal for it, right? This work is not that,
No.
right? And I think that intentionality on the daily micro level is something that I don't think people fully understand. I know that for me it feels massive and almost intangible because it's like everything that I do. But the thing that I think I heard you say also is, let's just name it. Naming it is an action.
Yes.
Even if we don't have answers around it, even if we don't have something that we can say, well, now that's never going to happen again, because it's not true.
Yes.
That's intense. And also leaning into that can be quite liberating in certain ways. Yeah?
That statement really hits me because I feel like who I used to be was always well-intended. I would say I was like a well-intended anti-Black person. Like I was in schools thinking I was doing good work, right? We were putting on great shows. I was being flexible. I had all these practices that like tried to like differentiate, and I was still doing all of these other things, sending kids out of class. At some point, I was like a dean of students for a year and a half, suspending Black kids one after the other. And so, yes, that is so huge. And I, you know, mostly like when I'm lesson planning or whatever I'm doing, I'm like, how do we allow Black trans women to be alive and live in their fullest joy? And then that is how I move and teach and be in spaces creating art. It is like, if we are not naming that and saying that out loud, then we're doing it masked with these words of love and kindness. But like when we say to young people, we want all Black people to be alive, and not just alive, but alive and joyful, skipping down the street, walking into rooms, smiling, all, like knowing there's burdens, but not the burden of our Blackness. Then when we build out from there, so then when you're in a classroom and I'm accountable to that and they're accountable to that, then it looks different how we're together and how we're learning. And what do we have to learn? And what do I have to learn? Right? It's like, what do we have to name and call out and be different? It's like the other day, my child was like, my 5.5-year-old had whispered something to someone about something being for girls. And he knows that pushes a button. So that's something he will regularly say, just like when he wants to, whatever. And then he was listening the next day to Big Frida, Miss Frida. And I said, you're listening to her, but you're not really honoring her by the stuff you're saying when you think I'm not listening. So are you having integrity, and are you honoring all Black people even when I'm not around? And the look on his face, right? Because I was basically like, we have to cut it off, because you can't be in this contradiction like this. We can be in it, but once we know it, we have to shift. And I know he's 5.5, but like, also, when does it begin? Am I waiting till he's 8 or 12? Absolutely not.
Your background is in arts education. It's in teaching. You were a classroom teacher. You said that you were dean of students. Something that you said, multiple things that you said, frankly, but Bettina Love comes to mind.
Yes.
Right? Around, how looking at the most marginalized folks in our society and how we need to be making sure that, I love that image, that Black trans women can joyfully bound and skip down the road without fear of their Blackness. And now that's where we're striving for. That's a big, bold, beautiful, and important thing. Because I have heard that said, but not the way you just said it, and creating that image. And I'm also I feel like I feel so connected to you in so many ways, even though we don't get to speak as much as I would like. But I feel like I'm on a journey, but I might be like, I'm still like, I don't know, not where you are exactly yet, but I see and understand so much of what you just said. And yet I'm like, oh, I can't wait to be where you are now because I have work to do. I have a lot of work to do. And this, like I said before, off camera, that this is part of my filling my well and my education. So I want to lean into you being an artist, and I want to learn more about your collective. And so, many of us in the arts and arts education field and beyond, but that's, my sort of sector, we're having lots of conversations around anti-racism. We're all, doing our reading, and some are doing it on an individual level, some are doing it on an institutional level, some are doing both in different ways. And so my question to you is around, in our own journeys, how can artists, or those of us in the arts and arts education field, feel really emboldened and, sort of a path lit. How can we light the path for how we reimagine, undo racism, undo and dismantle to build that skipping, bounding opportunity for our most marginalized young people, so that it can be liberating for all people within our work from that really fiercely anti-racist space?
I feel like that is a big question. And when I've thought about this for myself, when I've done work at, I've been blessed, I feel like very blessed to be at the ART in Cambridge, at Art Emerson in Boston, and work on these really big shows with these Black playwrights. And like, I'm feeling all big and bad, but then like also folks who like, I was like heavily interviewed for like to even be part of these things. And just like, I think that once I was kind of like a part of these things I thought about was like, who were in these spaces, right? Like I looked around and I was like, oh, there's a lot of light-skinned Black people. And so like, that may not be something that white people can sing in the same way, but it is definitely something about like, when we look around the room, who is there? Who are we asking things about? I will never forget Tef Poe, who's an organizer out of Ferguson and also a poet and a rapper, came to see Anna's show and was just totally surveilled by ushers. And they had no idea who he was, of course, but he could name it and call it out. And he had been invited to the show because he was at like doing some like artist residency at Harvard. And we had never invited him to do any post conversation with facilitators. We like somebody so knowledgeable and so powerful, and also had gone through transformation and continues to be in it. Like he will even say, I am always learning. I was always growing. But like we hadn't invited him into the room. I think about like who the ushers were that night. I think there may have been one or two Black ushers, mostly white women. I think grants. I think like it is high time for organizations to flip power on foundations and just like demand for them to also be in transformation. Like Nellie Mae just dropped a grant for Black educators and you could pay yourself. Too many grants don't allow artists to pay themselves just to do the work, but not pay themselves. Too many requirements, all this fiscal sponsor. I don't even know if I can curse on air. I'm a cursor, so I'll be careful. Just like trying to like who are you giving access to when you have to have a fiscal sponsor? Some of the best work happens with grassroots folks. And I think theaters have done things around like reduced ticket prices and stuff like that, but it's also just like, who is actually still showing up? Are people buying seasons for other people? Like how far can we push? Are there Black trans youth involved in whatever youth programs there are? Are people intentionally making sure out of the 15 youth spots, 6 are Black trans youth, right? It's like the intentionality and the like naming of things, again, naming it just like has, and I'm sure I'm missing something, right? Because I feel like Dr. Savannah Shange always talks about how there is no Black liberation without an Indigenous liberation. And right, I haven't said that once. And so someone's always missing. And how are we like collectively keeping track of who should be like in the room in different capacities? And so really for me, I've had to really be careful and thoughtful when I'm applying for grants, like who I'm applying with it for, who I'm like, who's being paid. Everybody has to be paid for their work and labor, particularly BIPOC youth. Yeah, and I hope that's some stuff. That's what I'm always thinking about.
Right now, it's very challenging because the kind of recruitment that we're able to do for such, a limited time, it's a big question around like, okay, we're thinking about boards, we're thinking about percentages of how, who's being represented in your seasons. I'm thinking theater, obviously. Yes. But then in terms of the programming, like there's some work that we have to do, but we're also not hiring. So like, that's the thing that I like, but actually this is a good time then to make those plans, to be intentional so that when things are, one, you can re-look at all the processes because like everything has changed, everything.
Yes.
And so there's no reason, there's like literally no excuse. But you just gave me a thought that I was like, we haven't talked about that. So we get to talk about that in terms of teaching artists. Like who are we? We don't have any Black trans teaching artists. We should talk about that. And we should be thinking about what kind of spaces are we creating for that staff faculty, as well as for our full-time staff, and then institutionally, and keep going and keep going and keep going. And you're right, like is it possible that that we can include everybody in all the different spaces? If not, can we at least acknowledge that and sort of say, like, well, let's keep trying or keep changing where the spaces are.
And sometimes you have to like say, for the next 2 years, we're just focusing on making sure we are doing this right, that we're including these people. If you're going to be intentional about inviting people into a space, you also have to make sure you're doing that correctly, right? So you can't, I just applied for a grant and I was like, oh, I'm gonna make sure I write in to hire Black trans youth for this grant, or a piece of it. And then I'm like, oh, Ashley, you ain't ready for that shit? Like, what? How do I even, when is the last time I even read a full book? Not like skimming articles or reading articles, but like really, so like, how will I care for and hold these folks the right way? And so I think if you are intentional, you also have to make sure like you are ready to hold folks, right? That is like, people are like, you know, everybody wants to like say they're like hiring people, but then once they get there, it's the same white supremacy culture. And it doesn't matter if our whole community is Black, we can still be anti-trans and anti-Black with folks because we're not ready to care for people in the right way. So you are correct. You might not be able to do everybody because you can't maybe even hold everybody in the right way and care for folks. So it's just like when I'm like trying to support the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe up here, I am very careful about how I ask to support, asking like, how do you want me to show up? Because I don't know enough to be in community and leading or doing things. And so, yeah, it takes a lot of work and it will not all be at once.
Again, like that's sort of liberating, right? To say, okay, we're gonna try this, and yet we have to do our due diligence. We have to know how to care. The saying like we want a certain percentage of X, Y, and Z, but you don't know what you know, like just getting them in the door. That doesn't mean that you're creating a space of belonging.
Correct.
Yeah.
It could just be more harm and hurt.
Yeah.
If folks are not where they need to be. And I'm not saying that can't like happen wild, but there should be someone prepared to support you through that. And it simply is asking someone, what do you need from us?
Yeah.
What do you need from me? Like I'm already working with this organization who supports LGBTQ plus youth, and to like, I like need to be schooled. And when I do hurt someone, because I know I will, that's the other thing, right? We like we don't want to deal with it because we know there's going to be hurt, because we know we don't know everything, but we have to be ready and have processes ready for difficult conversations, processes for healing and moving through that and on. And that stuff is hard too, but it is liberating. I always feel I be read by people, snatched. And then I feel great because I am in better. I have like taken accountability for myself. Someone loves me enough to be honest, and we can go from there.
Let's talk about where we're going. So this is my favorite question, and it also is the most daunting question, I think. But it helps me to sort of imagine, right? And think about what is it that we're actually working towards. So what does a racially just and liberated world look like?
I think it looks like I can do all my for real dreaming here, right?
Let's do it. Yes.
Yeah. I imagine that we value everyone, and people can like not be ashamed to say, I want to own a cleaning business when I grow up. And because cleaning brings them joy, and there is no shame in that. And there isn't shame for some people who have like figured that out, but there is shame for other people. Shame is a emotion that comes in and can go away quickly because you are held and loved for all of who you are. I imagine like people walking the streets, picking apples off of trees, like food is accessible and growing and living. That like the people who are like cleaning people's houses make as much as doctors make or professors make or whoever makes a lot of money. They're on billionaires. We all have everything. We understand that there's value in each other and what we can offer. I really would love to just be paid to sing to people while they're dying, while they're sick, while they're teaching, while kids are trying to take a nap. Like, I would love for that to be valued as work. I would love for artists to be valued, right? I feel like I was just talking to a singer the other day at a birthday party. It was a daddy. And he was saying how his work is slow right now. And like, he will get paid $80 for them to show a video of a show he was in. And I'm like, it's so interesting, right? How like the arts are like always, I feel like on a roller coaster of value. It's like people will pay $1,000, $1,500 to see Hamilton, but get like very upset if like a theater teacher makes $75,000 to teach. Like it really blows my mind. And so I just imagine that people are just valued wholly. Yeah, I don't know. There's just capitalism is gone. White supremacy is gone. And those things are like distant memories and things we like can't believe happened, right? It's like a shock. Like what? People used to buy things to be more important than other people. What? Like, I just imagine years out, that is how one day people will be allowed to move. And just so much is just away. And, you know, there are women walking around with beards and, you know, maybe finally we can be done with like all these labels maybe, and we can honor our ancestors and know that they had to have them for a reason. But maybe those aren't around anymore. You know, and I think people are still working very hard because I think that stuff can like be like encroach and creep back, but we're all going to be reminded and like be reading and study together and reminding each other. And I don't know, that's a lot of what I often am dreaming of.
I could see what you're describing. I like it.
Yeah, that's what I think about a lot. Think about classroom sizes being 5 kids and yeah.
That there's a lot of care in what you just described.
Yeah.
For others, caring for community, caring for, there's a lot of, for lack of a better word, humanity.
Yes. Well, that's what I feel like the movement is, right? That's what this revolution is about people's humanity. I mean, I think so. Like being fully seen in your humanity. Because obviously if Black trans women continue to be murdered at the rate they are not being seen in their humanity, which I continue to wrap my mind around. You know, people are in the streets risking their lives right now. And some of those people in the streets are not there for Black trans women. Which is why some people put hashtag all Black lives, because that's not a part of it. Or they're not thinking about Black disabled folks. And that's people's humanity. Which I don't know, to be honest, like I hope to people listening, I am not perfect. I still am doing a lot of work. I like look up to people a lot. Adrienne Maree Brown, Patrisse Cullors, like these are people I'm like, Miss Frida, like these are people like also that I look up to, and I'm not perfect. But I used to never get it right. And I wasn't thinking about those people either. And still forget to think about some people. So I think, yeah, humanity.
I could keep talking to you forever.
I know.
Come on. But I want to thank you so much for your time. Thank you for changing venues in the midst of this. Just to keep the conversation going. Seriously, thank you so much for giving us so much to think about and dream about and work on. Really, thank you.
Well, I appreciate being here. I appreciate sharing where I am right now on this journey. And I hope folks just can listen and hold on to something and understand that it's never too late to be radically transformed. It just isn't.
Thank you everyone for watching Teaching Artistry with Courtney J. Boddie. This conversation and more will be on the audio podcast. So subscribe to SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. We won't go back. We can't go back.
Can't go back.
Onwards.
Now is my time to shine. When your time comes, don't postpone it. When others doubting out, you don't condone it. Truth be told, yourself is your toughest opponent. When your moment comes, grab hold and own it. Never let go, stand tall and hold tight. Overcoming obstacles is the objective in life. Doubters all the night, and unto them you shine bright. Cause inside your head, on goes the light. Ignite.